Is the Bible historically reliable, correct?
Yep.
Correct. That's the first topic.
Okay.
So
Alright.
who's gonna start? Have y'all decided it's gonna be Matt or it's gonna be Bubba?
We can do Matt. Have Matt go first.
All right, no problem. All right, Matt, whenever you're ready, just tell me to start the timer and you can start talking.
Okay. Start 3, 2, 1, go.
Go.
Alright, well, I'd like to thank, first of all, Bubba for being willing to have this discussion. So I guess with the first point here, is the Bible historically reliable? I would say that the Bible is not merely like a religious document. It is a collection of historical writings. So the New Testament in particular meets the highest standards of textual reliability. We possess over 5,800 Greek manuscripts of the New Testament, far more than any other ancient document. And the earliest copies come within a few decades of the original writings, which is ensuring a minimal gap for distortion. Furthermore, we have archaeology, which confirms numerous details of biblical history. Luke, for example, has been repeatedly validated as an accurate historian. He's recording names, he's recording places and customs with precision. We have external sources such as Josephus and Tacitus, which corroborate with the key events, including Jesus' crucifixion under Pontius Pilate. We have the textual integrity, archaeological support, and historical corroboration demonstrate that the Bible is not just a collection of myths, but it is in fact a trustworthy record. If the Bible is historically reliable and Jesus rose from the dead, then we must take its message seriously. Now, concerning the last point that we will be talking about is, did Jesus resurrect? And the case for the resurrection of Jesus stands on a foundation of well-attested historical facts, recognized not just by Christian scholars, but by a broad spectrum of historians. And these minimal facts include Jesus' death by crucifixion, the discovery of his empty tomb, the post-mortem appearances experienced by various individuals and groups, and the sudden transformation of the disciples, which were men who were previously fearful and in hiding, yet went on to proclaim Christ's resurrection at the cost of their lives. And the best explanation of these facts is that Jesus truly rose from the dead. Alternative theories such as hallucinations, conspiracy, or mythology fail under scrutiny.
That's your
Hallucinations
turn.
are... Okay, we'll go there.
All right, cool. I'm good to go. So Matt and I both know the historical method in which we use to determine whether or not testimonies are historically reliable. Thanks to Cliff, we both watch Cliff, and the method is that you provide tests to said testimony and see if the testimony passes all, not some, but all of the tests that you put forward. And unlike Cliff, I haven't done that with just the Gospels. I did that with all 66 books of the non-Catholic Bible, which I'll share right here in side chat. And my real quick, my categories are who wrote the book, when was it written, why was it written, who was it written for, and what is the genre? Like, is it, which is the same exact thing, the what is the genre category is the same exact thing that Cliff puts forward. And it's, if you are a person like me who denies the supernatural, then you can reasonably say that these books are mythology because there's no amount of archaeological evidence which is able to prove that Jesus walked on water. There's no amount of archaeological evidence that's able to prove that Jesus was there at the Sermon on the Mount and whatnot, or these other types of things. The categories of like now, when it comes to my take of historical reliability of Holy Scripture, whether it's the Bible, the Quran, the Bhagavad Gita, any of that stuff, I personally believe, and Matt said it in his opening, that you should have no margin of error when it comes to the historical reliability. Like, every single book of the Bible should get like a 5 out of 5 with like flying colors, because we're talking about billions of people's salvation. And I'm sure Matt would agree, like, even if like the authorship of a random book like Judges has questionable authorship, then either the book of Judges should be thrown out or the entire Bible should be considered to be historically unreliable. What I'm going to press Matt on when we get into the discussion is a couple of specific stories and doctrines in the Bible, and then I'm going to ask
That's your time.
Okay. Cool. And it's like we could start 20 minutes, and I can kind of... I only have one more sentence to say.
So, sorry?
Nothing. Like, we could just kind of start, because I only had like one more sentence to say.
Yeah, it's all good. So we're gonna go get into some open dialogue. Again, the topic is the historicity, reliability of the Bible. You probably won't hear much from me. I'm just gonna make sure there's no red herrings, no ad homs, no none of that. Just make sure, keep it civil, keep it entertaining. And yeah, I'll start the timer now.
Sure. Well, the very last thing that I was gonna say was I'm gonna ask Matt point blank, do you think that this story or this doctrine really happened? Which, then my time ran out. So I suppose first, Matt, I would ask you about specifically the 6-day creation that it's presented in Genesis 1 and 2. Do you affirm a literal 6-day creation, or do you affirm its allegory?
Well, so for the 6-day creation, I actually hold that the same view from. So I come from the camp of Dr. William Lane Craig, which sees it as mytho-history. So
So it
let's kind
didn't.
of go into that.
So it didn't. So it's metaphorical 6-day creation.
Yeah, it's communicating it's communicating like truths, but like it's also it's also using like allegory too at the same time. So it's like a
Right.
combination of the two.
In your opening, you said that the Bible is not mythology, but you just said that 6-day creation is mytho-history.
Yeah, so the distinction here for like the mythology and like the mytho-history is that like it's just using elements from like myth to convey a truth. So let me try to describe it like better. I wouldn't say that like it's myth in the sense that like most people use the word today. It's as if it's like what like it's just a made up story. And what Dr. William Lane Craig has argued, and what I think is a reasonable approach, is that Genesis 1 through 11 fits into the category of this mytho history, which means that it contains like real historical truths, but that they're presented in a highly stylized, symbolic, and figurative way rather than like a straightforward modern historical prose.
Sure.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. But what that still falls into is if you're going to say that Genesis 1 and 2 didn't actually happen in the way that the Bible describes in Genesis 1 and 2, then what you fall into is a true Christian dilemma. Because if you say no, like you did, that it's actually uses allegorical language and it's mostly metaphor, the way that the Bible describes it, then you're denying basic science. Then you are saying that the Bible is open for any subjective interpretation. However, if you say yes, then you deny basic science. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, I understand what you're getting at, but okay, so it sounds like you're pressing me like if Genesis 1 isn't taken as 6 literal days, right? Then I'm trying to still man your position here. Then you're saying that opens the door for completely subjective interpretation, right?
Yeah, and which we've admitted to me is just like it's mytho history, and we're trying to use a little piece of allegory and mythology in order to explain our understanding of how the world was created, and I don't see I don't see that as reliable.
Right. That's okay. I'm gonna just say that I'm not saying that you can interpret the Bible any way that you want. That's not what I'm saying at all. The difference that I'm saying here is that recognizing like the literary genre and the intent in the passage and saying that like you can interpret however you like. I would disagree. Scholars, both Christian and secular, they analyze ancient texts by looking at the context, the language, and the historical background. That's exactly what I'm doing with Genesis. So, like, for example, if we read Psalms 98:8, which says, "Let the rivers clap their hands, let the mountains sing together for joy." I'm not saying, well, rivers don't have hands and mountains don't sing, so the Bible is false. I recognize poetic imagery when I see it, and the same is true for Genesis 1.
Yeah.
So it uses the same structure.
It's the thing is like Psalms is very clearly all the Psalms are clearly poetry, and you could say that there's poetic language. You said that there's allegorical language, but however, Genesis 1 and 2 are very clearly describing the way in which the world was created. It's not like it's also not clearly some type of poetry. It's not like once upon a time there was the rivers and the mountains, and then God came together and then walked down fairyland and then said, "Poof! The world is now created in one." It's giving a clear description and like it's an honest interpretation would not say that Genesis is just complete poetry and allegory. I was like, do you have a response? Oh, Benjamin's echoing really bad.
I'm sorry, but the only one that's cutting out for me, or
Am I cutting out for anyone else?
Nah, you're good right now, but
Oh, okay. I said it's probably I touched my mic. It's that what I said was that an honest interpretation of Genesis is clearly saying, if you're looking at it, then this is how the world was created. There's no poetic language. God is saying, day 1, I did this, this, and this. Day 2, I did this, this, and this. Day 3, I did this, this, and this. It's not like once upon a time, I clapped my hands, the rivers of the universe came out, and then the earth was created.
yeah. There is a difference between like Genesis 1 and 2, like the Psalms, like you're pointing out, right? Where the poetic nature isn't as obvious. But I would just say, just because something describes real events doesn't mean it has to do so in a strictly like modern format. So if we take Genesis 1 as like structured for what it is, like a highly organized, repetitive, and symbolic way, then you have 6 days divided into 2 sets of 3, days 1 and 3 forming the world, and days 4 and 6 filling it. So you have these like repeated refrains, where it's like, and God said, and it was so. Yeah. So really quick, the structured framework is different from a straightforward historical account, like say the Gospel of like Luke, which reads like a research biography. But I mean, is there anything there that I need to like clear up?
No, actually, I can even give you the benefit of the doubt with Genesis. Like, even though I do think it's a problem that you labeled it as mytho-history, but how about this? Do you agree with the statement that I made in my opening, that if the authorship of any of the text is like put up into question, then the reliability should be put into question as well?
Okay. What were the methods that hold on? Okay.
Yes. I said the methods were authorship, historicity. When was it? So I'll say again. Who wrote it? When was it written? Who was it written for? Why was it written? And what is the genre? But I am much more keen on the first two. When was it written and who was it written by? Would you agree that if the authorship of a document is put into question, then it should, one of the books of the Bible should be completely thrown out?
No, I don't think that they should be completely thrown out. Okay, yeah. Just because like the authorship of a biblical book like is debated or people are unsure, that doesn't mean its reliability collapses. That would be like saying if we don't know exactly who wrote a historical document, then we can't trust anything in it. But when we don't use that standard for we don't use that standard for like other ancient texts. And like an example of this are the many historical writings from antiquity. We don't know with absolute certainty. Bad echo.
Oh yeah, it's Benjamin. Benjamin, can you mute yourself?
Here, I got it. My bad. I didn't notice it.
Yeah, it's cool.
It's okay. We don't know with absolute certainty who wrote some works attributed to Plato or Tacitus, but historians still trust them based on their content, their historical corroboration, and manuscript evidence. And really quick, Bubba, when it comes to the Bible, authorship is important, but it's not the sole criteria for reliability.
Yeah, I know.
Okay.
And then it's like, the thing is, what I was going to point out to you is the book of Hebrews. No one knows who wrote Hebrews. It's like, there's theories which are, I think, pretty valid. Apollo wrote Hebrews, but Paul definitely didn't write Hebrews. It's not in his style at all. But what you're suggesting by saying that the authorship isn't important is that if I was roaming around in 100 AD and I picked up a document off the floor, didn't know who it was written by, then that is a possibility of being biblical canon.
Yeah.
How do you know that Hebrews is not authored by Paul?
Here,
dude, we're not doing that.
Sorry about that. Everyone, this is a 1v1. I'll add 10 seconds to the clock, but everyone's a 1v1. Please don't interrupt.
Yeah, it's fine.
Yeah, so I didn't say that. Okay, so let me make it just really clear because I thought I made it clear. It's not the sole criteria for reliability, right? So, like the Gospels, for instance, they're like they're traditionally like attributed to Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. But what matters more is whether the text accurately preserves historical events and like these theological truths. But even if a skeptic questions like Matthew's authorship, that doesn't undermine the historical content within it. We evaluate. Um, you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Early attestation, manuscript evidence, external corroboration, and internal consistency. So I would say questioning authorship doesn't automatically mean that we throw out its reliability. That's for like an all or nothing approach that we don't apply anywhere else in historical study.
Sort of. It's like, the thing is, you agreed with my statement in the opening when I said, like, even if you were to take a little, sorry, you didn't agree, but you did it first until I asked you point blank, which was, if you were to even question like a random book, like I don't even know, Second Samuel, or like I don't even care, the Song of Solomon, if we don't know when it was written or who it was written by, then we should either throw it out of the Bible or the Bible is unreliable. And you seemed to not have a problem with that until I asked you point blank if the authorship is in question. So sorry.
His internet's just a little off.
Yeah, I restarted my computer to make sure that that didn't happen, but I'm so sorry that that did happen. The last
No, you're good.
yeah,
I'll resume the time now.
yeah, so the last point that I made was, and we can move on to a different point of the Bible, which I think is very, like, if Matt kind of denies this as like a thing, then I don't think that there's anything that would be able to switch his mind off and like to say that the Bible's not historically reliable. But the last point that I was going to make about the book of Hebrews is, I don't see how you can ignore, like, we're just accepting that this random letter from someone we don't know is now considered to be a part of our Holy Scripture. Because we're talking about, like I said, we're talking about billions of people's salvation. And since we're just going to use this document, we don't know who it was from, which means that we don't know where it was written, like how it was written by, or roughly where it came from, then how can we just accept this to be a part of our eternal salvation?
Yeah. Yeah. Hebrew, let's just kind of go through this because I think that's actually a great example. So I would say that you're right that no one knows for certain who wrote Hebrews, right? We have the early church, which had various theories. Some thought Paul wrote it. You had some people who suggested Barnabas or Luke or Apollos. But here's the key, and I said this earlier, is that authorship was never the sole criteria for like canonicity. So the early church didn't say, well, if we don't know the author, we throw it out. They used several key criteria to determine whether a text was authoritative and belonged in the canon. And there's a couple of things which, talking with Josh here, that we can, and these would like include like apostolic connections. So even if Paul didn't write Hebrews, it had to be tied to apostolic teaching, and early Christians accepted it because it was clearly written by someone within the apostolic circle, someone who had like the firsthand access to the apostolic teachings. Then the second part is like the orthodoxy. The book had to align with the core doctrines that were already established in Christianity. Hebrews, for example, has some of the richest theology on Christ's priesthood and the fulfillment of the Old Testament and the New. And then the last point here is that the universal acceptance. So the early church widely accepted Hebrews as scripture,
Sure.
not because like they knew the author with certainty, but because they recognize its divine authority. So your analogy about picking up like some kind of anonymous document off the floor in 100 AD doesn't really work, because the early church wasn't just grabbing these random texts like your analogy. They were deeply concerned, so far to the point that they tied the historical, or if it was historically connected to the apostles, right, it had to be theologically sound, and it had to be recognized by the body of believers as inspired. So in other words, Hebrews was not included despite its unknown authorship. It was included because even without the named author, it met the rigorous criteria for being part of God's revelation.
Sure. I want to ask you about a certain point in the Gospels now. Like we did first, we did Genesis, then we did Hebrews, but a specific point in the Gospels, which I wanted to point out, and I wanted to get your ask you a few questions about it. Firstly, do you think that Jesus resurrecting from the dead is the greatest miracle of all mankind?
Yes. Well, is that like a personal thing, or are we still sticking on topic of like the history?
It's a quick It could be a personal question, like a quick thing.
Yeah, I'd absolutely say that Jesus' resurrection is the greatest
Okay.
miracle in human history.
Cool. If we're gonna say that Jesus' resurrection is the greatest miracle that has ever been done in mankind's history, then, in terms of quantitative evidence, I want to show you Matthew 27:51 through 53. It's the resurrection of the saints after Jesus died. Or, sorry, like right after Jesus died, he just gave up his spirit in the verse previously. And then the tombs were opened, and the saints that were in the tombs resurrected and appeared to many. This was just 3 verses that were said in like people witnessed according to Matthew. Which would you say is a greater miracle? One man Jesus resurrecting from the dead, or these many saints resurrecting from the dead, which appeared to many people?
Well, if Jesus' resurrection, so my position, if Jesus' resurrection is the greatest miracle, then this other thing that like you're talking, what is it? Matthew 27:51.
Yep, it says
53.
I can
Yeah,
summarize.
it's in the side chat.
Yep, it's in the side
Let's try
chat.
not to spend too much time on this because I could see how can this can kind of drive off the original topic. Let's try not to spend too much time on it.
It's very relevant to like the historical. This I think says about the historical reliability of the Bible very much, because I would argue that if you're looking at it from a skeptical perspective with no Christian biases, then this simple conclusion would be that Matthew included this as like to elevate Jesus' character as an outstanding miracle in just a single passing sentence, and it's not mentioned by Paul. It's not mentioned by any of the other 3 Gospels. Paul, by the way, who was a person who was trying to do missionary work, and to say that like convince people of Jesus' truth, you think he would include this in his missionary?
Mm-hmm. Well, if we're not going to spend too much time on this, then is it okay if I clarify my position on Hebrews on that?
Hebrews if you want.
Yeah. So I would just say really quick that magnitude doesn't determine significance, right? Raising multiple people from the dead at once, it's going to sound more dramatic, but that doesn't mean that it carries the same theological weight as Jesus's resurrection, because Jesus's resurrection wasn't just another instance of someone coming back to life. It was unique in, let's just say like 2 ways. So Jesus's resurrection was permanent. The saints in Matthew 27, like Lazarus did in John 11, would just be that like they just woke up from a slumber. But Jesus's was permanent, and Jesus's resurrection fulfilled prophecy, and it vindicated his divine identity.
Sure, but in the way that Matthew 27 describes it, is that there were many people. It doesn't give a number, but it says many people resurrected from the graves. The tombs opened. I don't know how they opened, if it was magic or if it was someone moved them, but still, many people resurrected. Many people saw them, but it's just silence. Nothing from the other Gospels, nothing from Paul. Don't you think, Matt, that if Paul is trying to convince people that Jesus' resurrection was some type of like the greatest miracle of all time, then he would surely mention this?
Well, I'm not sure. Okay, even if, well, whether they mention it or not, they themselves have given over to the theological impact that Jesus himself, someone who claimed to be God, would raise himself up from the dead. That's the person that's going to save them. And that's exactly, even if Paul doesn't mention it, he's making that the faith is the foundation through the resurrection of Christ, that he rose on the 3rd day according to scriptures, from the 1 Corinthians letter, which he wrote, which the people were talking about. He was talking about how that is our foundation. So that is more impactful than these other saints. These other saints that were resurrected, they don't hold this weight of like eternal.
Then I'll ask you point blank, like I said I would do in my opening. Do you think that this really happened?
Absolutely. I think that. Wait, which part? That Jesus rose, or that the saints rose?
That the saints rose.
Well, I think that there's two schools of thought. I think you can take the literal or the figurative. I'm not sure how the figurative is because I haven't looked into it. But let's just say if Jesus rose and he has the power of over life and death, and he's also resurrecting the saints, I have no issue with that being consistent.
Yeah, and
1 minute.
yeah. So since we're only have 1 minute left, I guess the conclusion I would come to, based on you saying that, saying that it could be metaphorical and it's not that important, when I would argue it's the greatest miracle that has ever happened in the entire Bible. Doesn't many, however many that is, trying to say that it's either metaphorical or not as important at Jesus' resurrection, is it would be very strong historical evidence, because that's what the topic is, that if many people testified to it, many people admitted it, that they saw it, it was amazing, but you're claiming that it's just like, it could be metaphorical. That's wild to me. I'll kind of let you say a final word.
Yeah. So, well, I do take it to be, and I understand where you're coming from. But even, I mean, like you said, we would expect to see something like that. It's not, they didn't mention it. And so I think that the reason why is because of the community there. Their belief was not onto the saints, which is my whole point. It was, sure, if it's a literal thing that happened, it's like it's a crazy thing, you know. But that's not where the source of the awe comes from. It comes from ultimately Christ.
All right, and that's the time. So, are you guys still firm on no closing remarks, or do you guys just want to move on to the next
I think we
topic?
just move on to the next part, because we pretty much just said closing statements as our last thing.
All right, yeah, no problem. So, who's going to be starting off this next one? Since Matt, you started last time.
I'm gonna start off.
Bubba, do you want to start?
Yeah, I'll start off. Just 3, 2, 1. Yeah. So with Jesus, the next topic is Jesus did he really resurrect? And as Matt knows, I affirm that there is more evidence of Jesus' resurrection, historically speaking, than there is against it. And I subscribe to the idea that what happened with Jesus is the idea that his resurrection was actually just a hoax. People lied about it. It was an idea to push political, religious narrative. And I think that what that entails is primarily Peter and Paul are kind of like the main two conspirators going around saying that Jesus is really resurrected for whatever purpose that they were trying to pursue. My justification for believing in this, is we're going to get more into it in the open discussion, but two main things is my disbelief in the supernatural, and also, that's why I wanted to do the Bible first, my other justification is the Bible is unreliable, which we've already gotten into. The thing is, Matt knows this because I debated Hunter Bailey and he was in the room. Matt's perspective, of course, is that Jesus did resurrect, and when we get to the open mic, I'm basically just going to press him. The thing I'm going to press Matt on is, what is your justification for believing in the supernatural? And I'm going to harp on that. And also, what is your... I'm going to say, what I predict that he's going to say is that it would be revealed to him by the Holy Spirit of God, or something along those lines, and it's all thanks to him and his glory and all that stuff. But from an intuitive perspective, there are two justifications that Matt has. Either one comes from empiricism or from rationalism, from a more intuitive perspective. And meaning Matt is either going to say that supernatural experiences have happened to him personally, which I'd be open ears if that was the case, or that he if no supernatural things have ever happened to him, then he kind of rationalizes and he believes.
That's your time.
Nah.
All right. Based whenever you're ready.
I'm a little confused. Are we going over our openings again?
Oh no, 2-minute opening for this topic.
Yeah, two topics.
Okay. This is why I didn't finish earlier. Okay, I apologize.
No, you're good. You're good. I was a bit confused too.
Yeah, okay. So, Josh, you ready?
Yeah,
3,
whenever you start
2,
talking.
1, go. Okay, so did Jesus resurrect? The case for the resurrection of Jesus stands on a foundation of well-attested historical facts, recognized not just by Christian scholars, but by a broad spectrum of historians. These minimal facts include Jesus' death by crucifixion, the discovery of his empty tomb, the post-mortem appearances experienced by various individuals and groups, and the sudden transformation of the disciples, men who previously were fearful and in hiding, yet who went on to proclaim Christ's resurrection at the cost of their lives. And I believe that the best explanation of these facts is that Jesus truly rose from the dead. Alternative theories such as hallucinations, conspiracy, or mythology, or these fail under scrutiny. And hallucinations are subjective; they are private experiences. Yet Jesus appeared to multiple people in different settings, including skeptics like Paul and James. And conspiracies fall apart under pressure. And first century Jews did not expect a dying and a rising Messiah, making fabrication implausible. Mythology takes centuries to develop, yet the resurrection belief was established immediately after Jesus' death. If Jesus rose from the dead, it vindicates his claim to divinity and confirms Christianity is true. I yield the rest of my time.
Are you sure you got 30 more seconds?
That's what I wrote in my book here, dude.
Okay.
Alright, no
That's all I got.
problem.
That's fine.
Yeah.
All good.
I
All
know
good.
Matt. I know Matt way too well. I knew that he was gonna bring
Just
up.
want to double check.
Yeah, okay. You can start the timer. I don't care. I knew that Matt was gonna
Alright,
bring.
20 minutes.
Yeah. I knew that Matt was gonna bring up minimal facts, and I knew that he was gonna bring up the martyrdom of the disciples. We can start with the disciples. Matt, how do you know that the disciples all died for their beliefs in Jesus?
Yeah. So I would say that when you say like no, are you saying like absolute certainty, or are you saying like with confidence?
What? I'm saying. I asked you. I said, how do you know that the disciples died for their beliefs in Jesus?
Well, the reason why is because of like church tradition. You have things like
Church tradition. Church tradition isn't exactly history. It's like church tradition is like historical documents would be history.
Yeah. Well, okay. So then I would say that the strong historical traditions can come from early Christian writings. I think they're as early as the 2nd century. But I know, like, for instance, when we talk about Peter, it's attested by like First Clement. It's confirmed by Tertullian and Origen. You have James, who's revealed that in Acts 12:2.
Yeah.
You have Paul, who's beheaded in Rome, which is attested by Clement of Rome.
Yep.
You have all this stuff. You
Cool.
have
You're right.
So multiple.
Yep, you're right so far. And what I'm sharing in the side chat is I've done extensive research when it comes to like the historicity of the disciples dying for their beliefs. What I just shared in the side chat is the yellow, right, is Clement of Rome. Like, out of all of the disciples, all the testimonies that they died for their beliefs, do you know how many of them actually were written by a person who knew the disciples or witnessed them die? The answer's 2.
No, I don't. Okay.
And it's Clement of
It's
Rome.
pretty solid research.
Can we mute him? It's Clement of Rome.
Yeah, my bad.
It's Clement of Rome who testifies to both Peter and Paul, which is really what drove home the idea that Peter and Paul are like the kind of the prime conspirators in a narrative that Jesus rose from the dead. It's that because every other source that we have is either from an apocryphal gospel or it comes from a church father who lived like 100 years or 150 years after Jesus, or after the disciples, I should say. Which I don't find that to be historically reliable. Matt, I don't think that you would honestly find that historically reliable. But the fact that the best testimonies that we have come from Peter and Paul fit my narrative pretty well, that they were prime conspirators about forming a hoax that Jesus resurrected from the dead.
Okay. Let's try to, if you're okay with meeting some middle ground here. I will say that the short answer for what you're laying out is that, like, as far as I know, I could be wrong, but is that we don't have like these direct eyewitness testimony of their deaths. Can we agree on that?
Only with 1 Clement chapter 5, which records both which records both Peter and Paul.
Peter and Paul. Right. Okay, but I would say that the traditions, they're not completely baseless. So like for James, right, the son of Zebedee is the only apostle whose death is directly recorded in the New Testament. Would you?
Judas.
Okay, Judas. Yeah. Are you saying that you wouldn't accept things from like Polycarp, who was a disciple of John, which affirms that the apostles suffered persecution? Obviously, you know, he was an early church leader who had direct connections to John.
Them suffering persecution is different than the statement they died for their beliefs. I'm fine with believing that they were ridiculed, that they were spat on, called liars, called idiots, whatever. But what we're looking at is how they died for their beliefs.
Well, the persecution here is that they would be put to the full extent, which would mean death.
Put to the then, I would, because I didn't find anything about Polycarp in my, like, I looked into Polycarp, I looked into Ignatius, I looked into Tertullian, I looked into Clement of Rome is the only one who testifies specifically in a document from the 1st century that the disciples died for their beliefs, and it was only 2 of them.
Okay. Even if like we still have these early sources and some that are not, they all confirm that the apostles faced persecution and they were willing to suffer for their claim that Jesus rose from the dead. So I would say that the key issue isn't whether like we have these firsthand execution records for all of them, but whether like their actions are consistent with people who truly believed what they were preaching.
And again, what I'm getting at is the standard narrative that the disciples died for their belief in Jesus. Like, that's what we're kind of looking at right now. If you want to shift to like a different topic, or like, well, if you want to, I've been asking you a lot of questions. If you want to ask me a couple questions, that's fine. Just like, because I think that the evidence that we have that all of the disciples died for their belief is just not true.
Okay, yeah, I appreciate the back and forth. I do feel like I've been more on the defensive, but
yeah,
that's okay.
That's what I said. Feel free to ask me some stuff.
Yeah. So since we've been like focusing on whether the disciples actually died for their belief in Jesus, I guess I'll just start with this question in return: is if you're skeptical that the disciples were martyred for their faith, how do you explain their radical transformation?
The radical transformation. So personally, I believe that Peter didn't have a radical transformation because, first of all, I don't take the narrative of the Bible to be reliable. So everything after Jesus died on the cross, I don't think that like Jesus really appeared to Thomas. But with Paul, who's kind of like the main person under that narrative, with Paul, I think that he genuinely believed that he saw Jesus in some capacity on the road to Damascus, which did completely change his perspective from persecuting Christians to being a Christian. Now, whatever form that really is, I say like this is where I would invoke like that he did hallucinate, but Paul's the only one I would ever argue this for, because I think is that Paul genuinely wanted to believe that he saw Jesus, or he really did believe that he saw Jesus, and then he shifted his perspective from becoming a Christian at that point forward.
Okay, so just for like some clarity here, it sounds like you're saying that you don't accept the biblical narrative as reliable, which means that you don't think Peter actually had like a radical transformation, and that Paul's experience on the road to Damascus was more likely a hallucination rather than an actual appearance of Jesus. And I think, okay, you are being consistent, Bubba, but yeah. If you'll allow me to press just a little bit too, why only Paul? Why, like, what about the other disciples? Because if you're willing to grant that Paul genuinely believed he saw Jesus, even if you think it was a hallucination, why limit it to, just Paul? You have the early sources, even the ones that like skeptics consider historically credible. They say that multiple people, not just Paul, had post-resurrection experiences of Jesus.
Yeah, and I believe that Thomas was deceived, or it didn't really happen. I believe that Peter is the one who's pushing this narrative, right? And whether he deceived Thomas or something else with Thomas, Firstly, the big overarching thing here is I don't believe that the narrative with Thomas actually happened. I don't think, which was the last topic, I don't think the Bible is historically reliable. But with Peter, I think that he didn't have a rapid transformation. I think that you would agree he's kind of the main disciple. If whether you're a Protestant or a Catholic, you would say that his name is mentioned the most in the Gospels. He's kind of the head disciple. So I don't think it's a stretch to say that after Jesus died, he wanted to elevate Jesus' character to be the Messiah, the Son of God, or God himself, and which is something I wish we got into last time with John's Gospel, but it's fine. And I think,
Okay.
yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. Okay. So, well, when we look at 1 Corinthians 15:3-8, it says, and this is one of the earliest Christian creeds dated within 5 years of Jesus' death, and it says that Jesus appeared to Cephas, Peter, the 12, and over 500 people at once, James, and lastly Paul. So this is not just coming from the gospel accounts. This is coming from Paul himself, and critical scholars like Bar Ehrman acknowledge that this creed predates Paul's writings.
Yes.
So my question is this. Why would Paul hallucinate Jesus and also believe that others had the same experience if only Paul had an experience? Fine, you could argue for hallucination, right? I'll grant you on that. But how do you explain the collective experiences of Peter, James, and the other disciples then?
With Peter, like I said, I don't believe that he hallucinated or had some experience. I think that he was trying to push a narrative that Jesus resurrected. But I would say with James, I don't even trust the narrative in the Bible about James, because it's whether it was actually written by James, I think is it's questionable. But do you know why I affirm Peter and Paul, or I condemn Peter and Paul so hard? Is because of the Gospels. It's, who wrote, first of all, the New Testament is half of it's written by Paul. So, and the other thing with the Gospels, who were Mark and Luke? That's a quick answer.
Is that a direct question?
Yeah, it's a direct question.
Go ahead.
Yeah, Matt. That's like, who are Mark and Luke?
Yeah, Mark and Luke. Well, Luke was a physician.
Who is he a follower of?
Mark was just a disciple, follower of Christ.
Mark he was a follower of Peter.
No. Yeah. I'm sorry, a companion of Peter. I thought when you say follower, I thought you meant like.
Yeah, not like
who's his.
Yeah, not like that.
Yeah, who's his Lord and Savior? Okay.
Mark,
yeah.
Yeah.
He's a companion of Peter. Yes.
Yes. Mark is a companion of Peter, and Luke is a companion of Paul. Luke wrote Luke and Acts. Mark wrote Mark. What we're saying is that Luke was not a disciple of Jesus. He's going off of what Paul is telling him. And Mark is a disciple of Peter. He's not a disciple of Jesus. He's going off of what Peter's telling him. So it's very likely that they're pushing the narrative that is being written to them by Peter and Paul for whatever reason.
Well, okay. Well, Luke explicitly states that he carefully investigated everything from the eyewitnesses. I don't think that he's like trying to push some agenda. He's taking everything into account. He's basically being the traveling historian.
Do you under that, are you saying that like Luke met all the disciples?
I don't think that Luke met all. I don't know the specifics on that.
It's because he clearly was a follower of Paul. He went up with him on many missionary trips, and he's even mentioned in one of Paul's letters. I forget which one. I think it's Romans, and where Paul mentions Luke, and these are the people that are following with him. I think that the idea that most of the New Testament is written by Paul, including Luke, who is a follower of Paul, is that this narrative that's going on about Jesus resurrecting is just something that's kind of being come up with by Peter and Paul. I don't think that this is a stretch, and I don't see any justification for believing that Jesus resurrected from the dead apart from you have to affirm the supernatural in a natural universe.
Okay. Can I kind of go back on what you were saying earlier? You said something like that Paul's experience here. Hold on. I wrote this down. That Paul's experience on the road to Damascus was more likely a hallucination rather than an actual appearance of Jesus. Did I get you correct?
Yeah, you're correct. I think that hallucination is most likely. I simply believe that Paul believed that he saw Jesus. Hallucination fits the most the most cleanly, but it could mean that he saw someone that he thought was Jesus. It could mean that he had a dream of Jesus, but hallucination's more likely.
Yeah. Okay. Since you said that like your field is in psychology, okay, let's just say that hallucinations can happen. Sure. Okay, but the typically the individual experience, they're like typically individual experiences. They're not these group experiences that, you know, I mean, you know, I sent you the stuff that Dr. William Link talks about the hypothesis and how the hallucination hypothesis and how it has a major problem. But when somebody has a hallucination, like let's just take Paul, it's usually driven by strong expectations or grief. And we find that Paul wasn't grieving Jesus. He was actively persecuting Christians. He had no psychological reason to expect to see Jesus. And then also hallucinations, they don't explain the empty tomb. If Paul just had a vision of Jesus, then what happened to Jesus's body? Hallucinations don't make graves go empty.
Which question do you want me to answer, about the empty tomb or about hallucinations?
You can do the hallucination one first.
The hallucination.
We're out of
oh wait, how much time do we have?
5 minutes.
Oh, fine. That's plenty. That's plenty of time. It's with hallucinations. Hallucinations can pop up on like sound body people who are of sound body and mind all the time. It's sort of like, for example, sleep paralysis is something that has happened to a lot of people who aren't schizophrenic and don't suffer from seizures. Paul is not some 1 in a billion person who is a person of sound body and body and mind who experienced a hallucination out of nowhere. That happens regularly. And I believe that Paul, a person who wanted to know his Lord and Savior, he was a Pharisee Jew, so he would have wanted to know who his God is, and he knows the narrative of Jesus. What he hallucinated was consistent with his mind, and you can imagine if your entire religious perspective has been shifted from God cannot be a man to now I'm seeing God in the form of a man, your entire worldview, your entire world would be shifted in the way that it was with Paul. But with your question about the tomb being empty, this is where you can get into like the more shaky part of my conspiracy theory that I've wound here. It's that I believe that there are a dozen explanations as to what happened with Jesus's body not being there. It could be like Jesus' body was never buried there to begin with, and Joseph of Arimathea and Nicodemus buried him somewhere else. It could be that the disciples lied to everyone about the tomb being empty. It could be that there was which sucks I don't have it now, but in Matthew 27, it's something about like guards being paid off to do something separate, not involving Jesus' body. It's possible that they were paid off by the guards. There's a theory that Jesus' body was eaten by dogs. Like there's plenty of other explanations that don't have to invoke the supernatural.
Yeah. Okay. Really quick, because you said a lot there, but there's one more thought that I don't want it to slip. If I gotta my notes here. Hold on. Okay, you said you don't think. Go ahead, Josh.
No, I was about to say, if you need more time, I could add more time.
Yeah, sure. Go ahead. We'll have Matt ask him the question, and then we can do like closing stuff.
Yeah, I was about to say, because Bubba, you talked for a while there. I want to give Matt sufficient time to respond. So, go ahead.
Yeah, there was a lot there, but just going back off of, okay, well, you said that you don't think Peter had a radical transformation because you don't accept the Bible as reliable. Okay, fair enough. All right, but even from non-biblical sources, we see that Peter became one of the most prominent leaders in the early church. And Clement of Rome, Tacitus, and Josephus, they all acknowledge that early Christians, including their leaders, faced persecution. But if Peter didn't change, then why did he go from a man who denied Jesus out of fear to someone leading the movement? What would be your best explanation for that?
It's that, first of all, Peter is definitely a leader before definitely has leadership status before Jesus' crucifixion in the Bible. He's, like I said, the most mentioned disciple in all four Gospels. Peter's the one who's usually asking Jesus the questions. He's usually the one who's like just the main character whose name isn't Jesus. And So for him, this is why I don't think he had a radical transformation in the biblical narrative. He just goes from being the leader of the disciples to being the leader of the disciples without Jesus. That's why I think that he was the one pushing a narrative. But when it comes to, what was the other question that you asked, and then we can kind of get into like final statements.
Well, there was more. I wanted to get into the last stuff you said and then the final statements, if that's okay. But the last question I asked was like, shoot, where did I go?
You're right here.
About
What
Peter.
did I?
Well, we're talking about Peter. You said like he went through a rapid transformation, and I said something against that. But you had another thing that you said before that.
Was it? I think I said like if Peter didn't change, then why did he go from a man who denied Jesus out of fear to something like that? Yeah.
Denying Jesus. First of all, I don't think that that's very important when it comes to the Peter's. When you're getting peer pressured, and when someone that is clearly dying in front of you, and people are accusing you of being a follower of that man, I wouldn't really want to affirm that I know this guy or I think he's God either. It's just like there's 100 reasons why Jesus would say that he doesn't know Peter. He doesn't want to fucking die. He doesn't want to be crucified with Jesus. Like that would be pointless, because he has leadership. Like he has leadership status among the church. But there's definitely a bunch of explanations as to. But I also don't even affirm that this even happened. Well, actually, I take that back. I take that back. What I just said is that I'm fine with believing that Peter denied Jesus, but it's just like not terribly important.
Yeah. Okay.
1 minute, real quick. We have 1 minute. But what we can do, I could add like another 5 minutes, maybe.
I think that we can get
do another 5.
I just think that we can do closing stuff right at this point.
Yeah, but the thing is, I want to give, because you talked for a big portion of that, Bubba, and I want to give Matt sufficient time to respond. So, Matt, how about this? Here's what I can do. How about, Matt, I'll give you 3 minutes straight for you to respond to Bubba's claims, and then we can do closing remarks. Does that sound good?
Yeah, that sounds good, but can I steelman his position to make sure I have everything correct?
Yeah, go ahead. And then I'll start 3 minutes.
Okay, so, Bubba, you're saying that You're saying things like you think that you have multiple possible explanations for the empty tomb. Maybe it's the case that Jesus was buried elsewhere. Maybe the disciples died. Maybe the body was stolen. That I don't know. You said something about Jesus's body being eaten by dogs.
Oh yeah.
Okay. I kind of want to. Okay, is that correct so far? Is that accurate?
Yeah, I would say that me saying that Jesus' body got eaten by dogs is like me with hyperbole, but yeah.
Okay, Ben, you gotta mute yourself, dude.
Oh, sorry. I already muted him. Oh, my bad. Here, I'll mute him again.
Okay, so 3 minutes, because there's like a lot to unpack there. Like, my goodness.
Yeah, go ahead, and I'll give you a warning at the 30-second mark.
Sure. Okay. Let me just say, Matt, I don't actually. I think that the point is that I think that there's a broad amount of narratives that could reasonably subscribe to if you don't affirm that Jesus actually resurrected. Like, I'm not even saying that I believe in any of those things, but I do think that they're more reasonable than a man resurrected from the dead.
Yeah, hold on. I gotta add that. Hold on. There's a lot that's like on my mind, and I'm getting like anxiety. It's weird. Especially, I think it's because Josh is like, I'm gonna give you 3 minutes, so I have to like
make it
cram
sufficient.
everything in. Yeah, I have to like cram everything in. It's crazy. Are we ready?
Yeah. Once you start talking, I'll start the timer.
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Yeah, sure. So, on the part where it was Jesus buried somewhere else, if Jesus's body was secretly buried somewhere else, we would expect some kind of counter evidence from his opponents. We have the Jewish leaders who would have every reason to shut down the resurrection claim immediately. And the easiest way to do that would be to produce the body. But there's no record in either Christian or even hostile sources that anyone ever said, hey, here's the real grave. And then also, all 4 Gospels say Jesus was buried in Joseph of Arimathea's tomb. A known person, not some unknown mass grave. If this were a fabrication, It's not the kind of detail that you would make up, because Joseph was part of the Jewish Sanhedrin, the very group that condemned Jesus. And if the early Christians were lying, they wouldn't tie their story to a well-known figure who could easily be questioned. And then you put up like, possibly maybe you're postulating maybe the disciples lied. You would have to believe that all the disciples knowingly fabricated the resurrection, then willingly suffered imprisonment, beatings, and then for some, death for something they knew was false. And then this runs into a massive, massive historical problem, because people don't die for something they know is false. The disciples were not expecting Jesus to rise. They were hiding in fear. And if it was a hoax, someone would have cracked under pressure. Yet we have not a single disciple or a record of them recanting. It's one thing to say that like a few might have lied, but how do you account for all of them sticking to the story, even under torture and execution? And then the last part here, did someone steal the body? This was actually the earliest counter explanation that we see in Matthew 28, and that the disciples stole the body, but that theory collapses for a few reasons. First, the tomb was guarded. This is Matthew's gospel, which records this objection, and it mentions the guards. Thank you. The disciples were terrified and in hiding, not plotting grave robbery. And if the disciples had stolen the body, I'm sorry, I misspoke. It would have made no sense for them to later preach a resurrection, knowing that they had just hidden the body themselves. And again, if it was just a grave robbery, why didn't anyone find the body? And then the last one, which you said is kind of comical, you're hyperbolic, was Jesus' body eaten by dogs? Oh. This is a variation of the Jesus was never buried theory, that maybe he was thrown into some kind of common criminal's grave or left exposed where animals ate the remains. But this does not hold up for three reasons. Roman custom allowed for proper burials after crucifixion. Joseph of Arimathea's involvement, again, a known figure who places Jesus in the tomb. And then the earliest sources, Christian, Jewish, and Roman, assumed there was an empty tomb. The debate wasn't whether the tomb was empty, but how it got that way.
And that's your time.
That's Matt's time.
Right on time.
Like you gave Matt 3 minutes. Want to give me 2 minutes? Or hell, 1 minute? Because
I mean, if we're gonna do closing, I think maybe like 2 minutes each, maybe.
No, I can just like make my closing in the form of a question. It's that, Matt, I want to see if Matt's listening. Why don't I affirm the narrative that all the disciples died for their beliefs in Jesus?
Yeah, you don't affirm that you don't affirm it because like you don't. Well, there's a couple of reasons. You don't believe that that we have reliable evidence that the biblical narrative is even reliable to begin with.
Yeah. So what you were just in that 3-minute spiel, what you were giving me was an external critique and not an internal critique, because I provided an internal critique about the how the reliability that the narrative that the disciples died for their beliefs in Jesus is very, very flimsy and flexible at best. And so you were trying to pin on me that the disciples died for their beliefs in that 3 minutes. That's it. That's false. I don't believe in that, and I've explained why. And the other thing is that you kind of listed every single point that I said in just like a passing sentence, that they could have not buried their bodies, they could have lied, they could have done this, when the main point of me going into all that wasn't that I affirm any of those things. It's that the point was not that I believe in any of those things, but I'm just simply saying that there are plenty of other alternatives which are possible when you don't affirm the supernatural. And I think that's kind of like the end of my spiel, and we can, I don't know, Matt can give like a closing sentence and that'll be kind of it.
Yeah, no problem. So, Matt, I guess I'll give you the 2 minutes.
Yeah, no, I don't. I mean, I guess, but after I'm done, I'm going to yield my time. It's not going to take too much. I was just really going after the stuff where he said, off the top of his head, he thinks that these are sufficient, and that he could just, it seemed to me like he could just kind of wave them off and explain them, that it would hit every single mark. And so I was trying my best, while being flustered, to go over everything that came to mind. I try to relate scripture as to like why that's not the case. I referred to how the disciples were hiding. So, I mean, oh
yeah, it's fine. It's just like at this point, we can kind of. Are you good with like ending it here? Because I'm good with ending it here.
It's up to y'all.
Oh yeah. Oh
I
yeah.
think both y'all got the time.
Oh yeah. We both got the time.
Unless maybe you want to take questions
good.
from people.
Oh yeah. We could. Yeah, we can do questions.
Up to y'all,
Shit.
as long as both of you agree to it.
Yeah. Like maybe like.
I'm running.
Maybe,
I'm actually running.
Matt's running late. Okay, we have to go. Matt has to go.
No problem.
Yeah. Well, I just told them that, hey, I got caught up with something, so give me like 5-10 minutes.
5-10 minutes.
I don't know how
right
long
now?
they're gonna wait.
Like I'm curious if certain people in the chat, like, does Abysmo left? Does Hermeneutics have anything he wants to ask? Maybe Rami, maybe Joshua himself, or Yasmin.
I'm sure Nerla would love to ask some question.
Herman, Rami, anything? They're just chilling with us. This was a great debate. Thank you, both of you.
Yeah, sure, that was chill.